Hi, I'm Tony Northrop, and for my photography buying guide, I'm in the studio today to test out more than a dozen different studio lights. These are lights where if you're building out a professional, commercial, or portrait studio, you might want to consider, and I'll be covering all sorts of different price points from way cheaper than your flash to up into the 5 figures. So I'm going to be covering basically everything that I can possibly test, including of course the look and feel of it and the durability, the different mount types that are available, the power outputs, the white color balance as it changes, and the flash duration. I'm going to start this test out with the lights that I use on a daily basis, which are Paul C. buff lights. I have 3 different examples of Paul C. buff lights here. The Alien Bees are their cheapest lights. They range in price from $225 to $360 depending on the output. I have the mid-range ones here, the B800s. I also have an example of their White Lightning series. The White Lightning is kind of an older generation of light, though it's still current, and it's big and heavy and very, very durable. They're built like a tank, whereas the Alien Bees lights are kind of plasticky feeling and, well, also bright and colorful. The high-end Paul C. buff light, my favorite, is the Einstein E640, so we'll be testing that out too. Up first we have the Alien Bees B800. This is their mid-range entry-level light from the Alien Bees entry-level lights. And you can see it has very simple controls here. There's a dial that allows you to dial it from 1/32 power up to full power output. And then simple buttons that control the modeling light and whether the modeling light gets brighter or dimmer as you adjust the output. If you don't know, the modeling light is a continuous light that allows you to visually gauge the output and the relative output of different lights in your studio. To remotely control this Alien Bees light, you have to get one of these adapters, and you can see it's kind of a retrofit hack. They have a phone cord that goes into it from this thing, which plugs into the wall and receives the wireless signals from my Cyber Commander that I have here on the camera. You also have to turn off the optical slave. Most strobes will have an optical slave built into them so that if they see another flash going off, they just automatically fire. This makes it pretty easy if you don't have a wireless commander of some kind. You just have to either use an on-camera flash or control one of the strobes, and everybody else will just join in whenever they see a flash. I'm going to test out the flash duration by turning on this fan and then seeing how blurred the colors on the blades are. So that shows us the amount of blur at the minimum power output. The minimum power output is generally also the shortest flash duration, so I'll crank it up to the maximum power output and test that too. Now you'll notice that I'm adjusting the power output remotely from the camera here. I'm using the Paul C. buff Cyber Commander system, which I use in the studio all the time, and I absolutely love it. It provides a nice little kind of, not a touch screen, but a nice graphical user interface that allows me to keep track of all the different lights I have in the studio and quickly drop the power output of any light or raise everything universally. Also has a flash meter in the back, which is really useful for getting your settings up straight. Now I'm going to test the flash's white balance. The thing about white balance is they're always supposed to be daylit balanced, but as you stress the light, as you take multiple pictures at a fast pace, what happens is the white balance can change. The white balance also might change between high outputs and low outputs. So I've fixed the white balance on this camera here so that any changes in the white balance will be a little more obvious. So I'll put it at about half power, and then I'll take pictures as fast as I can to stress the light a little bit. Up next, I have the Paul C. buff White Lightning series. This again is their mid-range, the X1600. You can get them in twice or half the power. The controls back here are a little more complex because they provide separate controls for flash output and modeling lamp output. I don't really find it necessary to manually adjust the modeling lamp because I always just have it track the total flash output. Just as with the Alien Bees, the remote control is done by this ridiculous adapter with a phone cord. The White Lightning adds one additional button here, which is this full power, half power button. You cannot remotely control this, but it allows you to cut the overall output by 1/2. So why would you ever want less output? Well, it's important for fill, because you don't always want your flash at full output. And in fact, if you can keep it at half output or lower, then you'll be able to take more pictures continuously. In fact, I don't find huge amounts of output to be especially useful in a studio environment. It can be good if you have them set up for a wedding and you need to fill up an entire room. But for the studio, even the base model AB 400 lights are plenty powerful enough. What you do get from having a higher capacity flash is the ability to fire off 8 shots in a row. Because if you only use 1/8 of the total power output, then it'll have some additional capacity in there and allow you to fire repeatedly, and that really can make a difference, because in the studio you often want to take rapid shots. So let's put this on the light stand and see how it does. I'll just use the Cyber Commander to decrease the output of this light down to the lowest so I can test the flash speed and see how fast it'll go. Now I'll crank the power output back up and test the white balance. The last of our Policy Buff lights is the Einstein E640. This is kind of their newest and best, in my opinion, of the strobes. This is highly computerized and it has a nice color display here that shows the current charge and the outputs of the total light and the modeling light. And you can control it from these buttons here. But more importantly, you can control it with the Cyber Commander. Now, one difference I want to point out is that this is the little remote control unit. So you don't have to have the phone cord attached. It's smaller, lighter, and in fact, it's cheaper. This only costs you about $30, whereas the controllers for the other strobes add $60 to the cost. So while this unit is a little more expensive, you get to save yourself $30 if you plan to use the CyberSync with it. Now, this light is fairly remarkable in that it's very intelligent and it kind of knows itself, so it will automatically adjust the white balance or flash output according to your needs. And in fact, it has separate modes for short flash output and for maintaining a steady white balance. So in a typical portrait environment, you'd probably set it to white balance priority so that it will keep a steady white balance throughout your session. If you were shooting sports or some sort of action, only then would you switch it to flash duration priority, and that'll give you an extremely short flash. But let's test it out. I'll see how I can do. I just think that's the coolest feature of the E640, the way it can freeze action. Now, if you crank it up to the maximum output, well, it's still gonna be a little bit longer than it would be otherwise, but when you're working with shorter flash durations, you can really freeze the action. And honestly, it's not just for sports where this comes into play. If you have kids in your studio, you'll find, even if you're shooting at 1/250th of a second, there'll be movement in their eyes. Even with stock photography, if somebody's laughing or smiling, that will cause a little bit of unsharpness. So if your flash is faster than your shutter speed, then you can pretty much eliminate any sort of movement. Now, most strobes have power output that looks like this. It starts high and then drops off gradually. You might think it's just a brief moment in time, but it's really not. It's gradual and then kind of fades away. So what the Policy Buff lights do, well, what the Einstein light does, is it starts out high, but when you have it in sports mode, it suddenly cuts the output. Therefore, it doesn't have that kind of long tail where you might get some useful light out of it, but it doesn't happen over a short period of time and therefore it doesn't freeze the action. So now I'll switch this into color priority mode and try out the white balance. Most studio lights will come with just a cheap reflector like this, but the most important part of your studio light is going to be the light modifier that you put on it, like this beauty dish that I have behind me, but we also use huge soft boxes and octo boxes. So the more variety of light modifiers you can get, the better your lighting is going to be, the more flexible it's going to be. Now, Policy Buff decided to basically use a standard that none of the other popular lighting manufacturers use. So basically you'll end up buying Alien Bees accessories. There are a pretty wide variety of light modifiers for the Alien Bees accessories, and Policy Buff makes pretty much the best stuff, but you can find find a good variety of third-party tools too. Now, we'll cover Profoto later, which has an outrageous number of light modifiers, but the Policy Buff stuff tends to be less expensive, and it might be what I end up recommending for most people. You can see that it's fairly easy to remove the light modifier by just moving a single switch on this particular light. The other lights have slightly different controls, making it a little more difficult to switch between them, but this and the Alien Bees and the White Lightning all share the same light modifiers. Up next, I have 3 examples of the Elinchrom series of lights. These compete pretty closely with the Alien Bees and Einstein lights. This first one here is more on par with the Alien Bees, the d-lite series. They range from like $250 to $400, and they'll provide similar output to those Alien Bees lights. They're not quite as colorful, but they're also light and kind of plasticky. The controls are digital rather than analog. That doesn't make any difference to me, but it might to you. But one big advantage that they have over the Alien Bees lights, the receivers are built in. And if you factor in the cost of adding that receiver, these can actually be cheaper than the Alien Bees lights. You can see they're pretty primitive lights, just up and down, and they allow you to control the modeling light. It's got a built-in optical slave like all these lights do. One step up from that, the BRX series of lights also has a built-in receiver for their Elinchrom Skyport control system. And the controls back here are basically the same set of things that you can do to it. These run you about $450, $600. So they're pretty on par with the Einstein lights. We'll see if they are just as powerful as the Einstein lights. This is the big boy here, the Style 1200 RX. This is an extremely powerful light, and I think it runs you about $1,500. The controls still are very basic. None of these are quite as pretty or nice to use as the Einstein, but we'll see if they're just as equally functional. We also have a massive beauty dish on here, but of course, beauty dishes and such are available for any of the different series of lights. This particular light modifier system requires you to unlock it and then give this a twist. So it works pretty well. There's not a huge difference in the usability of any of these different systems, but whichever system you buy into, you have to make sure you get compatible accessories. So I'll start with the cheapest light here and see if we can trigger it. Oh, before I do, now there are 2 different ways you can control these lights. The first, and my preference, is the on-camera Skyport adapter. This is their method for controlling the different lights. You can see it's nice and cute. It has little up and down buttons, so basically you just select which group of lights you're controlling, and then you can push up or down, and that's really all you need. Now, it doesn't look nearly as nice as that Policy Buff Cyber Commander with its digital display, and it doesn't have a meter built in, but for me, it's nice and lightweight, and it's enough to get the job done. But if you want more control, if you want total control, they have iPhone apps and iPad apps, and in fact you can control it from your computer. It's pretty remarkable. So this is their iPhone app, and you can see you can list multiple different lights, and then you select a light and you can just easily control the power output to bring it up or down, as well as controlling just about every other setting of the light. So it communicates really intelligently with your different lights. Now, for me, I'd much rather just be able to do it on my camera right here by just pushing a couple of buttons. The only time I'd want to use a separate app, whether for an iPhone or for a computer, is if I'm barking orders at an assistant. It might be easier to use verbal remote control, right? Tell them, okay, light number 2 down 2 stops, and then they could easily move it with a mouse. But for me, I would find it faster to just control it directly from this rather than even barking orders at somebody. The d-lite series and the BRX include the Skyport receiver built in, so there's nothing else to buy. And that, in fact, gives you a $60 price advantage over the Policy Buff White Lightning and Alien Bees lights. The Skyport, however, does not include a receiver, so you have to buy something extra, and it can actually be pretty expensive. So let's put these lights to the test and see how they do at stopping action and maintaining white balance. Notice that I had to switch cameras. Elinchrom very generously sent over this gear, but I didn't get a receiver for the high-end light, so I'm having to use this PC sync cord, which is like a standard for controlling flashes from, I don't know, the 20s or something. It's a really old standard. So I switched over to my OMD EM1, which does have a PC sync cord. My Nikon D5300 didn't have it. And as I took the first few sample shots, whoo, my poor cameraman wins, because this high-end light here, it's blinding. I've never worked with such a powerful light. You could definitely fill a cathedral with the light from this thing. And in fact, I cannot properly expose a picture with that even with the aperture shut all the way down, even at the lowest ISO, all I get are just completely white pictures. So I'm gonna have to crank the output way down just to get a picture with it. Now, as I'm taking these pictures, I remembered something that I really like about the Einstein E640 that neither the White Lightnings, nor the Alien Bs, nor this light have, and that's an automatic dumping. If you start at a high power and then you reduce the power output, the next picture you take is going to generally release that full power output. That's because when you crank the strobes up all the way, they charge up their capacitors. And the next time you take a picture, they unleash those capacitors. So if you start at a high capacity and drop down, those capacitors are still fully charged, and it means that next exposure won't give you the exposure you want. And I've definitely had shots ruined because of this, because I just forget that I have to dump a picture. So the Einstein will automatically dump for you. This light, however, does not automatically dump for you. So now let's check how the white balance varies when we really push this light. And notice if I take shots too quickly with this light, it doesn't even try to fire. Most lights will give off whatever light they can. This one just waits until it's fully charged again, which is kind of an unusual behavior, but it's okay because you need to kind of monitor your pace when you're shooting in a studio. Let's switch over to the d-lite RX4. So the d-lite is not nearly as powerful as the 1200, but it's a little smarter in a couple of ways. It automatically dumped the light, and because it supports the Skyport built in, I was able to just put the Skyport transmitter on my D5300, which doesn't have a PC sync port. Now, I could have also used a simple adapter that goes into the hot shoe and connects to the PC sync port, so that's not too big of a deal. I will add that using this Wi-Fi transmitter is kind of a pain. These buttons are terribly small and difficult to push, and I can't simply hold them down to repeatedly increase or decrease the power. I have to repeatedly push it, and it was time consuming and just kind of a nuisance. So I definitely prefer either the iPhone app or go back to the Alien B's Cyber Commander tool. So I'll now put on the last of the Elinchrom lights, the BRX 500. Both those last two lights did try to fire if they weren't fully charged, which is my actual preference. And I hated the Skyport Wi-Fi tool so much that I ended up just walking to a light and pushing the buttons on that. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend trying to use this in a studio environment. It's kind of a pain. Let's move on to the big boys, the Profotos. Now, this bad boy is the Profoto D1 Air. They range in power output from 250 to 1000, and this one I'm holding happens to be the most powerful one, but we have all of them to test. I'll just hit the test button here. Yeah, it just blinds everybody. Again, this is a super high output, and you probably wouldn't end up ever needing to use this in the studio. You can see the user interface is straightforward, but you know what? The first thing we notice about the Profotos is they just feel wonderful. The other lights all feel cheap and plasticky by comparison. This is definitely a plastic composite, but it feels extremely professional. The buttons all feel really good. So for $1,700, you seem to be getting your money's worth. It's also got a nice little slot here to put your umbrella in. The Einstein has that too. Now, the mount type here is my favorite part of it because the Profoto mount is by far the most common mount and you can get an unlimited amount of accessories for it. But the best part is the design allows you to move light modifiers in or out. So what this does, besides simply going on easily, is it allows you to zoom the light source. So as you can see here with the zoom head, it actually has markings indicating that you'll get different degrees of coverage depending on where you zoom it. And that's really, really useful. Zoom light modifiers can be pretty expensive for the other lights. You basically need to get a huge parabolic to be able to do that kind of thing. So I love the way that the lights mount onto the Profoto, and I love the quality of it. So let me show you the remote control that it provides. They also have on-camera remote control provided here. You can see the controls are pretty similar to the other systems that we have. You'll be able to just bump up or down the energy. You can see as I'm pushing the button here, it goes up incrementally. as well as selecting the different light that you're using. That transmitter is $400, so it's actually more than twice as much as the cool Palsy Buff Cyber Commander with its nice colored display. And frankly, it seems overpriced if you compare it to Palsy Buff. But it does feel good and the buttons feel really nice, unlike the Elinchrom, which had terrible feeling buttons. Like Elinchrom, you can also control this from an app or from the computer. And this is the USB controller. So what do you think this might cost you? $500. The USB controller costs you $500, but it includes a really cool app. And you know what? You don't care. I mean, basically, for a simple studio setup, you'd be looking at over $10,000 with the Profoto equipment. But it would be bulletproof, it would look and feel fantastic, and it would work every time. But honestly, most Profoto studios probably are more in the range of $50,000 to $100,000. So $500 for a USB adapter doesn't seem like all that much. I don't know about you though. I don't have that kind of money to throw around for studio equipment. So let's put these lights through the test and see if they actually outperform the other lights. So I was kind of wondering if we were going to see the benefit of getting a $1,700 light, and the answer is I can definitely see why it's $1,700. It shot faster than my little D5300 here could. Every single shot was perfectly exposed, even though I was shooting continuously as fast as this little camera will go, even at the highest capacity. So it was doing an amazing job of putting out just as much light as I could possibly need. Whereas even the high-end Elinchrom, I'd fire and then 3 shots wouldn't be properly lit, and then the 4th shot would be lit, and so on. So if you want to be able to shoot fast, as you would certainly in a fashion shoot, these Profoto lights are going to do you really good. Now, they don't freeze action quite like the Einstein does, but they're doing better than most of the lights did. So let's try out the lower-end lights. Okay, so I just had to try it out and I put this on my EM10 to do 8 frames a second. The first frame was nicely lit. The other frame started to drop the light output, but it still gave me a pretty good light output. So I think if I weren't firing it at full capacity, it might have been able to keep up with 8 frames a second. Really great. Okay, brace yourself. This is full power. That 1000 also has that cathedral lighting power that big Elinchrom 1200 did. And it was able to keep up with 10 frames a second. Not at full output, but it put out a decent amount of light for each one of those really fast frames, whereas the Elinchroms just weren't able to keep up at all. So I guess you do kind of get what you pay for. I'm actually gonna go back to the Einstein and try that out at 10 frames a second to see how it keeps up. Well, I guess the Einstein can keep up, though. None of the other lights seem to do nearly as well. So I think the Einstein actually does hang pretty well with the Profotos. It doesn't have the same look and feel, but it actually stops action faster and seems to keep that white balance perfectly spot on. It doesn't have the same power output as some of those big lights, and Profoto has far more light modifiers than the Alien Bees and Palsy Buff lights do. So they still might be your choice for high-end professionals, but I really think these Einsteins can do 99% of what they do at a third or a quarter of the cost. So I have one more light that I want to show you, and it doesn't really fit in with these other lights. It is the new Adorama Flashpoint lights. And the reason it doesn't quite fit in is the example that I have is battery powered. So it's a location light, but it fits on a light stand and it has a beauty dish attached to it. So it really behaves like a studio light that you can take anywhere. Now you could strap a battery to any of these lights and take them with you, but this Flashpoint is designed to be used with batteries. It's super lightweight, making it perfect for travel, and it costs you $200. I bet you spent more than that on your flash, didn't you? So let's try out that Adorama Flashpoint light and see how it does. This is the Adorama Flashpoint MK180T. Now Adorama, they're a popular camera and photography store, but they do have their own series of lights, and some of them are traditional plug-in studio lights. This example, as I mentioned, is a location light, and it's really cool. This is the battery pack for it. So it's powered up. I can just hit the test button and it will fire. And I can take this anywhere. And it weighs almost nothing. Okay, it weighs more than your flash does. But look at that nice beauty dish that I put on it. The mount type is compatible with many other large brands, so they accept an almost unlimited variety of light modifiers, and it makes a great on-location light for $200. Now there is one big drawback here, and that's that there's no built-in wireless control system. Now, you can very easily get wireless PC sync systems that will work just fine as far as tripping these. And they also have, you can just turn on the remote light here and it will fire whenever it sees another flash. So you could fire it with your on-camera flash, and that's fine. None of those options will give you remote control over the output though. So you'll always have to walk up to it and turn this dial up or down. Not a huge deal, right? Another weakness of it is that it has an LED modeling light, which is not very bright. So as a modeling light, it's not very effective. The fact of the matter is that continuous lights, like the modeling light, take up a lot of power, and you wouldn't really want to be draining the batteries all the time. And for that reason, it doesn't have super powerful modeling lights. It would be like using a flashlight, right? Nonetheless, it does have a modeling light. You're not going to be able to see it if you're shooting outdoors, which is what it's intended as. But in the digital era, modeling lights I don't think are that important. You just take a test shot, and then you see what the strobe actually looks like, and you make adjustments from there. So I'll set this up, and it's not going to compete with the more expensive strobes that are plugged in, but I do want to see what it can do and what you can get for $200 that remains completely portable. Oh, I'll also point out that on my shoulder here, I have a Vagabond Mini. This is about twice the weight of the little battery pack that comes with the Flashpoint light. And you can use these Vagabond Minis to power any type of light, or really anything that takes electricity. In fact, we use it when we travel. We just plug our laptops in there when we're on the airplane, and they'll last for hours. But they're designed to be used with strobes. And of course, they're made by Paul C. Buff over in Nashville, but they can power the Profoto lights or any of the lights. So the batteries are specifically designed for that sort of high capacity strobe use. Just wanted to provide that as an option. If you're looking for location lighting, you don't have to buy a dedicated light like the Flashpoint. You can also just get a battery pack. But for $200, these are hard to beat. So let's give this a test. Well, we'll be giving the Flashpoint and other location lighting solutions a more thorough test, so be sure to subscribe to see those. A couple of the drawbacks that I noticed right away are that it takes about 3/4 of a second between shots at the lowest power output. So you're definitely going to have your camera in single mode. Now, that's okay because the alternative flashes tend not to synchronize that quickly anyway. If you put it at full output, which you might have if you were trying to overpower the sun, it ends up being like 3.5 seconds before it's ready. Oh, my PC sync cord fell out again. That's another disadvantage. PC sync cords suck. So you'll definitely want to find something better than that. Another major problem is that the power pack that comes with it comes with a belt clip. And I don't know how you would do that. Maybe you'd have an assistant actually holding the light and moving around. But for the most part, it's going to be on a light stand and unmanned. So you'll just end up leaving the battery pack on the ground, I guess. The Vagabond Minis come with a clip that actually hooks onto the light stand, which seems like a much more logical place to put it. I hope you found this fun and useful. It's part of my photography buying guide, which has a ton of detail about different studio lighting solutions. I'll give you all the prices and show you the very specific advantages and disadvantages of each. This video just supplements it to provide some kind of hands-on information. If you want more free videos like this, click subscribe and please click like down below. So to summarize, I personally use the Paul C. Buff lights. I have a little bit of a mix of all of them. They're an extremely good value, very low cost. They have one big disadvantage though, in that they're primarily available to those of us in the United States. You pretty much have to buy them directly from Paul C. Buff, like that guy. You can't go on Amazon or B&H. You have to get them from the Paul C. Buff website. Now they've had distributors for other parts of the world, but they've also had problems with those distributors. People all over the world want these Paul C. Buff lights, but they just can't get them. And for that reason, they kind of sell for outrageous prices on places like eBay overseas. Now, outside of the United States, I'm going to recommend most people go with the Elinchrom lights. The Elinchrom lights are flexible and powerful, and you have a wide variety of options, all accepting the same light modifier. So you can pick something within the Elinchrom range that suits your needs and your budget. I didn't like the remote control capabilities nearly as much as the Cyber Commander on the Policy Buff system, however, and because you're using that so frequently, that's kind of a big drawback. They also didn't have an option that had that kind of action stopping capability that the Einstein did, and they didn't keep up with our fast repeated pictures. Nonetheless, for people starting a budget studio, I think they're a good option. Now, if money isn't really a concern, if you're looking at a 5-figure budget, I would definitely go for the Profoto. I've been really impressed with them. They have an amazing feel, they're super solid, they just seem rock steady, and they're there every single time you take a picture. Profoto also has a variety of lighting modifiers that no other studio lighting system provides. You can get just about anything because they've been around for decades. They've been the choice for professionals for just as long as any of us can remember. So I think Profoto is definitely the ultimate option for those of us with an unlimited budget. Well, not those of us, those of you with an unlimited budget, because I don't have that. However, I still didn't like the lighting control system, the on-camera version of it, nearly as much as the Policy Buff. I'm sold on the nice LCD, color LCD of the Cyber Commander, but I did find the on-camera remote control to be sufficient. Now, I finished up with an overview of the Adorama Flashpoint, and like I said, we'll be digging into that more. But if you're looking for something better than a flash on a light stand, definitely check out the Adorama Flashpoint. $200, you can stick a beauty dish on it and get great light anywhere and not be dealing with those stupid adapters to put your flash on a light stand or the stupid folding umbrellas. Those things suck. You shouldn't be putting flashes on light stands. You should get something like an Adorama Flashpoint, or if you happen to have studio lights, get yourself a Vagabond Mini and plug them in. Thanks so much.